Have you ever built a life that looked great from the outside, but inside you felt completely drained? Maybe the job you worked so hard for doesn't light you up anymore, or the relationship that once felt secure now feels heavy and disconnected. Today, we're exploring what happens when your nervous system starts saying, "This isn't working anymore," even when your mind keeps saying, "But I should be happy." Welcome to Healing Beyond the Symptoms, the podcast that helps people discover the root causes of their health struggles and take back control with science, strategy, and self-awareness. I'm Dr. Leah Hahn, a chiropractor and functional wellness doctor who believes that true healing starts beneath the surface. So let's dive in. I'm joined again by Dr. Scott Hahn, chiropractor, nervous system expert, and my colleague at Body and Balance Wellness Center in Golden, Colorado. Together, we help people regulate and reorganize their nervous systems and reconnect to who they truly are. Scott, I wanted to talk to you today about a story, and we're going to call this patient Jane, about this woman's story who came into our office. And what I really wanted to talk about today and focus on is that her story captures what so many women are feeling but can't quite name. And it's that sense of disconnection where everything maybe on paper looks fine, but when they really start to get in touch with their lives, maybe it really isn't okay and it's not working for who they truly are. So what I remember, and we're going to talk about more, is that Jane came in with chronic tension. She came in with sadness and fatigue, and I would say kind of depression. But she kept saying that she didn't recognize herself anymore. So what do you remember about Jane when she first came into the office?
What I remember about her, I think, was just, physically I remember about her body was just the tension that she was holding, the stress, the protection that her body was just continuously in.
Very disconnected. I
Very,
remember just in general, like not a lot of breath, like very rigid.
a lot of protecting, a lot of guarding. When we went through the history, there was a lot of abuse within the family.
Hmm.
Her stepsisters were being sexually abused by her dad. She was never sexually abused, but there was just so much tension that she had lived through for so many years with, that situation, what was going on, and the guilt that she felt about what her sisters what she didn't go through, and just trying to find, her goal was to kind of let go of that stress, let go of that trauma to try to rebuild herself and identity of who she truly is.
And I remember what was really interesting about her story and situation as well was that she had been a dancer for a really long time. And often when we think about dancers, we think of like how connected they are to their bodies or maybe how flexible they are. But even with that level of flexibility and being able to perform physically in that way, she still had so much rigidity in her nervous system. So tell me about how that looks different than just being flexible, like in maybe an athlete.
There is one of the things that we look for is called passive tension. It's the tension that is structurally held within the bones themselves. And so she was one where there was really high passive tension in the area, and which means that the system is kind of bound up and locked up in that area. Now, she could move her body in a really good way, so she could bend into these positions, but those areas were locked up and they weren't moving, which was an area that through the lens that we looked at is kind of a defense mechanism. So if you think of someone who is angry, they'll kind of be like hunched over like this. You think of someone who's sad and depressed, they'll be like this. Each one of those patterns expresses differently within the system. So there was a country, I can't remember what country it was over in Europe, that they did a study where they actually measured where the emotions are stored within the body. And they were able to kind of document how those are felt and perceived. And from that, that helps us understand then to say, like, how can emotion get stored in the system and where are those different places that that emotion can get stored? So if there is, in her case, where there was just a lot of sadness, protection, not owning up to who she needed to be because of what she had lived through, there was a lot of tension in the mid thoracic spine, which is commonly associated with the heart.
Okay.
So, in addition,
Okay.
and there is a lot of tension in the pelvis, and the pelvis is a identity, which is how we view ourselves and the different roles that we serve within the world in our space surrounding us.
So when you see that high passive tension in an athlete, are you thinking that that's more stress from like the kind of like physical activities that they've done? Or are you thinking that that's more stress, like long-term stress from emotion, or how would you see that?
So the way that I perceive it is when you touch the spine, if there is it can feel the same structurally, like there's
Mm-hmm.
high tension. So if you make a fist and feel the back of your knuckles, that's kind of like what high tension feels like. There's like tension under there. If you relax your hand and feel your knuckles, still feels like bone, but there's a little bit of pliability, a little bit of give there. And so in a scenario, when I'm working with someone, when I feel what I'm looking for is if there is that high tension there, I'm looking for some sort of emotional charge. There's like, you can feel like a vibrational tone to that. And if there's no vibrational tone to that, then it almost always to me indicates that it is more structural in nature and maybe more sport related. But if you get into that area and you feel a really high tone or charge, or maybe you can even feel the emotion in your own system, that it's one where then you know it's much more emotionally based. Commonly in like in athletes and stuff like that, especially high performing athletes, one of the things that really drives them to want to to pursue their sport at the level that they are is because there is really common wounding early on. So what they're trying to do is build self-value and self-worth for themselves through the sport that they're playing or doing or whatever their passion is in that sense. So it's not uncommon that those two overlap. So what you can commonly see then in those scenarios where there might be something structurally from an accident, an injury, whatever that sport may have been demanding, but a lot of times it doesn't heal the way it's supposed to because there is that emotional trauma and that emotional struggle that's happening internally. So if you can get the system to let go of that, or if you can release that underlying emotional pattern, then you can allow then the system to structurally heal that underlying area that's been trapped or locked up for so many years, which then allows them to continue to, excel at their sport if they choose to.
Even though she had been this high performing athlete, she had all of this tension in her spine that was more emotionally related from the long-term trauma that she had experienced and what she was holding in her body. So I guess my next question is, what else did you see in her posture or her breath or her energy that gave you clues or signs that some of the tension that she was currently experiencing was from the way in the past?
So there's different ways that you can try to perceive how the body is stored, what's going on. A lot can come from the history just to try to make sense of here's the potential trauma, here's the potential challenges that this individual is dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you can feel that tone within their system, then you can kind of make those correlations to what this is. Um, the additional part that she was also dealing with is she was in a marriage that wasn't fulfilling to her as well. So she also had the struggle and challenge of not being happy, being very repressed, her voice being shut down, not being able to speak up, kind of in the similar of just like there was no physical abuse, but it was just more like emotional abuse
Her
of
spirit was dampened,
her spirit was
basically.
dampened, but she wasn't able to speak up for who she was, what her needs were, what her values were, and what she wanted to accomplish within life. It was
Mhm.
all based off him, and he controlled everything.
Okay.
So part of when we were working, as we started to work with her, as she started to let go of the kind of the past trauma and the past wounds, then the current stuff was able to come to fruition. She could start to process that. So we never really choose in that sense what the body is, picks to work with first. A lot of times we work with what's present, and a lot of times with what's present, um, isn't necessarily what's most at hand, because if it's not safe for that individual to express that emotion at home, or if it's not safe, like the situation that they're in, their body still needs to hold on to that protection. Their body still needs to keep itself
Mhm.
safe. So it's not the appropriate time to let go of that. But if there is stuff from the past which is no longer serving or no longer, serving its purpose to keep her safe, then what you will end up seeing then is that the body can let those things go first. Then we can start that deeper healing journey. And that's really what we observed with her was in her scenario was a lot of the past trauma is where we started with, because we knew the like where she currently was at, even though it wasn't fulfilling, she wasn't,
Ready.
aware of that, and she wasn't ready, and it probably wasn't time yet. Um, And everyone's, just because you go through the process doesn't mean you're letting go of whoever that other individual is. You're growing into who you need to become. Sometimes that relationship then can flourish and blossom and become something better. And sometimes it's time just to head in different directions, and that's okay. It's just whatever is needed by that individual to help them to become the best version of themselves.
Well, and I remember too, like when she started to be able to kind of process more of the past trauma, what we saw physically in her body was more breath moving through her spine, which is always an indicator that, okay, now we're getting to a place where there's more safety in the physiology. So her system was in a place where she could actually process things and feel like she was. Becoming more like emotionally in a healthier place to be able to let other stressors go. But I remember then too, we started to actually feel more flexibility in our spine. So instead of having that really rigid structure, we could feel things starting to let go. That passive tension you were talking about letting go in the bones, and her muscles starting to balance and be more supportive as well. So you could see all those physical things changing. But I think the other thing that I'm looking at and I wanted to ask you about is as she got into a healthier place and was letting go of the old trauma, then what happened in her current relationship?
So what we observed was, I know she always wanted kids, and they were struggling with conceiving, and there was a lot of stress and just tension that she just was continuing to hold in and around the pelvis area. It was more just about helping her let go of the stress and tension that she was holding within her, so she could become aware of what needed to change within her own life
Hmm.
to become the best version of herself.
Exactly.
And so as she, continued to, process that, then she realized that the relationship that she was in, might have served a purpose at one time, which when she was, prior to starting care, where it was like, okay, where, having a man who can be very controlling, could potentially be protective as well. So it's like you feel some level of safety in that aspect because you feel like the surrounding world isn't going to come get to me. But as you build that strength for yourself, then you realize you don't need that protection from someone else. You're able to own it for yourself. And so because of that, then she stepped up and realized like, oh, this is actually shutting me down versus keeping me safe.
And that's a point that we see all the time, not only with the research, but also just in practice, is that as people get healthier, they make healthier decisions for themselves. So you could have someone that is consistently trying to make changes within their life and it doesn't work. And they start over and over and over again, and it always feels like they're spinning in circles. But if you get someone to the place where their nervous system is in safety, and their body is starting to work in a healthier way. They're starting to function at a higher level. They're becoming more resilient. They're becoming more adaptable. Then you start to see them make decisions that serve them in a much higher way. And so she was able to shift, make a huge life change, not only by processing the trauma, getting her body to a healthier place, getting her nervous system to a safe place, but then developing that resiliency and adaptability. And then ultimately decided to end that relationship in a way that helped meet her higher needs. Is that how you would describe it, or is there any other way
I
that
think
you would
that's
add
that's
to that?
fairly accurate.
Okay. So ultimately, Jane made this big life shift and this relationship change. But at what point do you feel like she's really started to realize that the symptoms maybe that she was experiencing in her body were connected to the bigger picture of what was happening in her life? Because I remember she also made a career change. So a career change, a relationship change, and then really healing past trauma.
So there's two different stages that happen because there was, I think the first stage that I just remember her expressing to us was letting go of the past trauma, letting go of some of the guilt that she
Hmm.
held onto surrounding maybe what her sisters had gone through. And the purpose, and at that stage, I think, is when she did, that's when she's like, okay, like, let me step up, let me, be a better version of myself, or let me like be more my authentic way. So on top of that, she also was in a job that was incredibly unfulfilling for her, wasn't fulfilling her purpose. She wasn't really helping people. And so the first thing that she decided to do once she felt more empowered was change her career. And so she ended up changing her career back to what she was doing, but there was more passion there. And that was, I think, once she was able to let go of some of the underlying passive tension in the upper back. That was, you could feel that shift is then what allowed some of the career change. But then it wasn't until we started to get the stuff in the pelvis to let go once she had made that change. That is when we were able to start to see then her awareness of the relationship and the protecting and guarding that she was doing every single day. And it wasn't allowing her to be her authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
So as she started to tap into who I am and what do I represent in this world, that's when she start to question, is the relationship that I'm in allowing that to happen? Which then she ultimately determined that it wasn't, and that her, soul and herself and all of her different pieces were being shut down. And that was what she wanted to, she needed to be able to move forward in a different direction to be able to, ultimately become who she needs to be.
Often what you see, like kind of the pattern, is network types of adjustments are always very soothing and very gentle. Um, But in someone's physiological response, what you'll see is they first feel that decrease of tension in their body as things are starting to move more and get healthier, and there's more breath moving through the spine. But often, right before you see these big emotional shifts or big changes that someone experiences in their life, or they're ready, they have like a fuel to make those changes, you'll see what we would think of as fuel building up in their bodies, which is like tension actually increasing in their body, and that is energy that they can do something, like, do something big with. How do you see that in, like, practice?
So one of the things that we see with that is, as the tension, as their body's getting ready to make those shifts, make those changes, you'll commonly see the passive tension, which is the tension stored in the structure in the bones. You'll see that start to dissipate. But you'll also, at the same time too, it's common to see the active tension start to build, which
Mhm.
is tension in the muscles, which means the system's creating change. It's really common that someone can get sore in those time frames because their body is changing. They're not able to kind of protect and guard themselves the same way they were. And it's not that they can't, they're choosing to, be a better version of themselves. So they're not wanting that trapped into their system anymore. So they're making that change. Once that pattern changes, then it's common that you'll start to see the life changes in their life start to express.
Mhm.
Typically, those take longer. So it's not like most people all of a sudden one day it's like they wake up and I'm quitting my job, or,
Right.
I'm, getting divorced or whatever that may be. A lot of times that's a process, it's a journey. So a lot of times there's an awareness that starts to build. That awareness, then you'll start to see those changes in the spine. But once that starts to happen, then you start to see that life and
Yeah.
start to transform and shift for them.
And that awareness is so much about them being more connected with their mind body. So it's like their mind has maybe some new awarenesses of what their body is actually telling them. Like, this isn't right, or this isn't working for me anymore, or they have more energy in their system to, again, make a healthier choice, make a life change. So, okay. For listeners who are hearing this and thinking, that's me, I'm doing everything right, but I still feel off, what would you want them to take away from Jane's journey?
I think the biggest thing is, no matter how big the hurdle can be perceived up front, if you keep working in the right direction, you keep building yourself, that no matter what that change that needs to happen can come to fruition. It's almost like you need to trust the universe
Hmm.
that, whatever I'm supposed to learn, whatever I'm supposed to grow, whatever challenges that I'm supposed to learn through are going to be presented in front of me. And as we work through those, that's allowing us to create that change. That's allowing us to create that growth. And once we have worked through it, it's almost like it instantaneously shifts and changes.
Hmm.
And once it changes, then it's like, what's next? What's the next piece that we're supposed to learn and grow from? And that is, I think, the biggest thing is to understand that, or I should say, is that everyone's story is a little different. And in Jane's scenario, there was the emotional trauma from the past, which then kind of led her into the relationship that she was in. And just because the past got you there doesn't mean that you need to stay stuck where you're at.
Hmm.
And sometimes or maybe that's like there might be some challenge from our past that's preventing us for moving forward in a relationship that we need to. So both can be true, where it's like maybe it's time to let go and maybe it's time to step in.
Hmm.
Both can be true, but it just depends on what that individual needs for their own growth or wants for themselves as well. Because as much as there is, here's what I need, sometimes this is what I want can also influence those higher level decisions as well.
For sure. So I want to just kind of wrap things up with what are some subtle signs that you're out of alignment in your life or in your body?
I would say the simple thing is things feel hard.
Hmm.
When you're in alignment, they should feel easy.
Or
Not
like there's more
necessarily,
flow.
there's more flow to it. It's not that it's always easy. It's just that maybe you can get a lot accomplished. Maybe there's a lot of moving pieces. But when there is, flow, for instance, common ones obviously are body symptoms like my shoulder hurts, my low back hurts, like body pains and aches
That
and
are more
stuff like that,
chronic
that are more
typically.
chronic in nature. Those are really common signs that we're living out of alignment with our life
Hmm.
and those types of pieces. So that's probably the first one. Other ones, fatigue, sleep issues, anger, emotion
Brain fog.
dysregulation, brain fog. Those are really common ones. On top of that, even autoimmune
Hmm.
issues, because if we are living in that high stress state for extended periods, the body's looking for something to fight. And if there's no invader per se there, well, guess what it finds? It finds yourself. So
Hmm.
when we've been living in that fight or flight for a really long time, it's we have a hard time recognizing it until it's too late.
For sure. Yeah, and I go back to what Donald Epstein always said was that when there's pain in your life, you need to look at what are the incongruencies. What is happening in your life that's not congruent with who you really are, and take a look at those things. And sometimes it takes getting in touch with the mind body to really getting that connection strengthened to really be able to figure that out. So, what do you think is one small way we could reconnect with what our body's truth actually is?
I think the simplest thing that I've always seen to be one of the most profound and easiest thing you can kind of do on your own is if there is an area of your body where there is pain or some sort of symptom, just put your hand on that area and just touch it
Hmm.
and see and just like try to quiet the mind, try to listen. What is it trying to tell you? And a lot of times, if we're not skilled at this, you're probably going to be like, I feel crazy. I feel stupid. Like
Hmm.
there's nothing here. But you need to learn to quiet the mind. And the more you sit with that, and if you just ask the question, like, what are you trying to help me understand? Or what do I need to change in my life? Like,
What information are you giving me?
what information are you giving me? And that is where it's time to stop and listen. Because if all we do is just keep the mental chatter going, we never ever will ever hear the information. So there's a time and a place to quiet the mind so that information come through.
Hmm.
It doesn't always come through right away. So it's not like, oh, I'm having elbow pain, I touch my elbow and I instantaneously, get the message. If you've been doing it for a long time, you can tap in real easily that way. That is, that's not uncommon. But if it's your first time stepping in, it takes a lot of work. It takes time, and it might take 2, 3, days, maybe even weeks, where it's just like you ask the question, you're putting the intention out there, like, what is it that I'm supposed to learn? What is it that I'm supposed to take away? And then a lot of times it comes in the stillness where we're not aware that there's stillness, where it's like maybe I get out of the shower and I'm, drying off, and all of a sudden you get hit with this like intuition hit. Those are times that when you get those, it's like try to take a moment, try to pause, try to like tap into that to see what that message is. Because if our brains are constantly running, we never hear that. So we have to find ways to where that's at. Maybe it's we're just driving down the street, so our brain is occupied with driving, but then that information can come through.
So great. And that's a really great tool to use. How can nervous system based care then support the process of coming back into congruence?
So the way that works is when we analyze the system, we can get really specific and understand real directly what's going on and get there in a much quicker way. It's not that we're bypassing anything. We can just get right to the root of the problem, right away to be able to say, here's where the system's struggling with. This is why it's struggling. This is how it's struggling. How can we get the system to shift and change and become more self-aware at a much more rapid rate?
Hmm.
An increase in adaptability, which is as you increase the system's adaptability, part of the thing that we're looking at is coherence within the nervous system. So the coherence within the nervous system is basically congruency throughout everything. So it's, the brain is talking to the body's talking to the brain, all the organs are speaking and working together. Life can become easier, the emotions aren't trapped. Everything just can happen with greater ease.
Jane's story is such a beautiful reminder that healing isn't just about feeling better, it's about living better. When you start to make choices that align with who you really are at your true core, your nervous system doesn't have to work so hard to hold it all together. If this conversation resonated with you, stay with us. We'll be sharing more stories like this with you, stories of people who found healing when they really started listening to their body's own wisdom. Take a deep breath, listen inward, and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss what's next on Healing Beyond the Symptoms. Thanks again for joining me today on Healing Beyond the Symptoms. If you've been curious about Network Spinal, or if you've tried everything else and still feel stuck, I want you to know this. Your body is not broken. It's patterned, and those patterns can change. If you're ready to experience how gentle care can lead to profound transformation, I'd love to invite you to book a wellness consultation at bodyandbalancechiropractic.com. Together, we'll look at what your body needs to finally release, reset, and thrive. Until next time, breathe deep, trust your body, and remember, gentle can be powerful.